So we're going to run this conversation like we did yesterday. So it's kind of an open Q&A. But maybe first I'll have Brady and Jim introduce themselves to the group. So if you guys could just give a quick intro, that'd be great.
Hear me now? Okay. Brady Liebarger. Brady Liebarger. Been scalloping for 25 years, and I sit on a scalp advisory panel. I'm from Cape May, New Jersey.
Thanks, Brady. Thanks, everybody. I'm Jim Gutowski from New Jersey as well, born and get light. I've been in the scallop fishery. I think I got involved like 82. So I've been involved in the fishery both on the water and on land, managing the corporate and the vessels for some time. I sit on Scallop Advisory Panel with Brady. I've chaired that for about 8 years. So we've been involved in the process. We're fishermen, but at the same time, we understand the cooperativeness of it. And that rang true yesterday a bit. And I think that that's really important that we've come a long way since when I got in as far as our involvement in the fishery. So I appreciate you inviting us up, Dave.
You bet. Thanks, Jim and Brady. So as promised, Devora, you have the first question. I didn't forget. I did not forget.
I think that was a question from Melissa, who I think made a good point about phytoplankton. So it isn't just chlorophyll. Scallops are really picky of what they eat. The adults, the larvae and the early juveniles eat different food than the adults. The adults eat larger phytoplankton. So you can have a lot of chlorophyll out there, which are small stuff, nano pico phytoplankton, that isn't going to do the scallops much good. So that's true. And I do know this year I'm not an expert in phytoplankton, but I understand there was some really weird phytoplankton that I never heard of before. There was a big bloom of it, kind of, I think, southern New England, Long Island area. So those things are changing. Again, I'm not the real expert on it, but that is something to be aware of, and it may be that that's changing what's going on with the scallops.
Great, thank you. So we're just going to go ahead and open it up. I see Peter Hughes with a question in the back.
Morning, everybody. My name is Peter Hughes with Atlantic Cape Fisheries down in Cape May, New Jersey. I also sit on the Mid-Atlantic Fisheries Management Council. My question is for Glenn, and this is going to sound really, really crazy, but there are no crazy questions when it comes to this stuff that we lack understanding in. And is there any correlation? Here comes the crazy, with the Earth's mantle and the wobble that it creates. Could that, and it's imperceptible to us human beings, but it's not imperceptible to Mother Nature. And I'm wondering if the wobble that you have seen in the Gulf Stream or your associate had seen and documented has anything to do with the wobble of the Earth's mantle. Told you crazy. Sorry.
No, that's a really interesting question. So I usually don't follow the Earth's rotation closely, but I think about 2 or 3 months ago, there was a paper actually, and I think it was in Nature, where they actually detected some shifts in the Earth's wobble there. Now, I don't know, if this went to the mantle or not, but there was a cliff that collapsed in northeast Greenland there. And it caused a tsunami, and it was 640 feet high. It was in a fjord there, and it just slashed back and forth in the fjord. It had like a period of 9 seconds there. There weren't any people up there, thankfully, but they could actually measure the change in the Earth's rotation rate from this amount of mass, sloshing around. When I get back to Woods Hole, I will ask some geologists about that. I've never even thought about that, but that's a really interesting question. I'll get back to you.
Yeah. Question of the day right there. Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, hello. My name is Jay Olson, commercial fishery, also on the AP, and I can see Brady and Jim cringing right now, but that's fine. I have a question, but I don't know if anybody can answer the question. It's just a thought. I've heard a lot about water temperature, salinity, photoplankton. Has anybody studied pH level? We know that ocean acidification is becoming a thing now, and the pH level is going to affect sea scallop shell growth, and if it becomes brittle. Has anybody taken measurements of the pH levels in the scallop grounds, or is that something that we should be doing? Thank you.
Anybody on the panel have insight into that one? No, but I think Devora has a response.
We were this year. So we're working with Alec Wang from Hui, who a marine chemist who's developed this this sensor called Chanos, and we deployed this year on HabCam the Chanos sensor. So we do have, there've been occasional from CTDs, occasional pH measurements. But this is really a step forward because we have continuous pH measurements, both in the mid-Atlantic on Georges in wide areas. It's admittedly still a very short period of time, but and we intend to do this next year as well. So this is something that I think deserves monitoring. I will say also, from what I know of, there have been some experiments as well, mainly led by our Milford lab. And I think this is something, it may be thinning shells a bit and slowing growth a bit. Really serious effects of this are still several decades off, I think, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be monitoring it.
Gary may want to respond.
So Gary Wickfor is at the Milford Lab, so I can directly follow up on the what Devora shared about the experiments in Milford. There are actually multiple physiological consequences of changed carbonate chemistry that are our lab's experiments led by Shannon Misek, who was here yesterday and I think joining online today. And I think actually reproduction is one of the physiological functions also affected. And so, it's not just shells, it's about an overall physiological response. And we've, put a fair amount of effort into studying this. We published a couple of things already and have some information forthcoming. So to answer the gentleman's question in the back, yes, there are people looking at this and considering it at a pretty comprehensive and deep level. Thanks.
Great, thank you. As I said, kind of in my opening statement, the things that we need to cover in this topic area are really broad, and I'm glad we touched upon the water chemistry, because I think that's an important one to consider. So thank you. Drew.
thank you. So Drew Minkiewicz, I'm the attorney for the Sustainable Scalloping Fund. And the presentation on the oceanography out there was interesting. And it was also confirmed what a lot of people saw. It was getting a lot of reports about, really cold water this year. And as we sit here now, we have a survey estimate of about 1 billion individual scallops in the elephant trunk. And one of the big questions is the water going to stay cold enough for those to grow up? Is there something worth trying to save there? Or is it going to warm up again and are they going to die off? And that's like one of the things we're currently struggling with. So I was wondering,
are there any indications of this abnormal cold temperature? Is this something that's just a one-year phenomena, or, and I know predicting the future is impossible, but are there any indications that this is, some kind of thing will be around for a bit?
Well, I inadvertently edited out my what's next slide at 5:45 a.m. this morning. So that wasn't deliberate there. But no, that is a great question. And when I was giving talks about this, right through July, I really was worried about a decadal shift, and I didn't have time to show some plots, but that decadal shift that was in Kevin Friedland's talk that Dave presented, the magnitude of that cold anomaly is similar to the shift, for example, from the warm 50s to the cold 60s there. And the spatial pattern is similar. So I was pretty worried is this a decadal shift? Because we don't really know mechanistically with the physics, the wind forcing, all those things. But this fall, it's actually come back to normal conditions, particularly in the Gulf of Maine there. And so the other possibility that I was worried about was that there was a big shift in the circulation up on the Newfoundland shelf. But luckily, one of my friends was up there on the Newfoundland shelf this fall, and he said conditions were pretty normal. So I think it was a 12-month one-time pulse. So what I wasn't able to talk about in the interest of time is the shorter scale processes that can affect the temperature right in that region. And so I talked about the warm core rings and the number of warm core rings. Just recently, we've had 2 warm core rings interacting with each other, and also a big meander crest of the Gulf Stream. And that's pushed a fair amount of warm Gulf Stream water into that region. And that's why the squid catch has improved there. So we really can't predict those short-term, pulses. And one of the weirdest things that we started to notice last fall, and actually I even talked with Devorah a little bit about this, is that we're getting these weird Gulf Stream meander crests that are being quasi-stationary for like up to a month and a half at a time. Those are supposed to propagate out to the east, those waves, and they seem to be getting stuck. So if you are getting Gulf Stream water coming off in the form of these shingles or filaments or whatever, they can be longer lasting. They can be weeks instead of days in the past there. So, there's a variety of processes and timescales. But if there was like a sports betting thing on those 3 possibilities, I would certainly say that one-time 12-month pulse.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
I have a question for the fishermen on the panel, and it's relative to the trends you're seeing. And, we're all assuming and have survey data to support that the fishery is changing in the Mid-Atlantic. Is that your experience, and what sort of a time period have you seen that happen?
So, thanks for the question. I mean, we've seen changes in a cycle multiple times. So since I've been involved, it's been really bad. It's been really good. It's been really bad. It's been really good. And now we're on our trending cycle. So, back when I fished, we didn't really look at all these underlying factors. But to me, we fished inshore in the Mid-Atlantic a lot when I was fishing, and scallops don't seem like they live there anymore, or at least they haven't since in 2010, 2012. So it poses a question as we talk about all this enhancement, like where would we think about putting spat collectors and spat? So my question would be, does the spat not land there and then begin to thrive there, or it doesn't land there? So thinking back in time, 2012 we had Superstorm Stanley. So it was in October. The weather was the warmest water temperatures of the year. So I just wondered, did that have some kind of a long-term effect on inshore areas in the Mid-Atlantic? So it's my 2 cents for now.
and and I'll follow up with that. I've speculated for years that when we have weather patterns that come through, like hurricanes, at the same time that the spat is in the water column, is when we get these shifts of spat landing inshore. So we can almost kind of go back and follow weather patterns and see if you have big spikes of spat in areas where we don't typically get it. And that being said, with this spat collection, what Jim was just saying, if we were to able to put in spat collectors inshore where we're not seeing scallops live, we could at least find out if spat's landing there, and then if we catch it, then we know it's just not surviving. And then we could just kind of check that off the box. That's why it's not there. But until we actually start doing things like testing that, I don't think we're going to know if it's just, is it making it, or is it getting eaten, or it's just not showing up. So I think that's one step we can try.
Devorah.
Couple things. I think it's quite possible that storms like Sandy have, I mean, I agree with that. That coincided, 2012 coincided with the really large year class on Georges Bank. And the area that would have been affected on Georges Bank, kind of the southwest portion, like Light Chip, that's exactly where we saw that huge year class. So I personally think that that had some effect on it. And we saw the really dense scallops in areas we normally don't see many scallops. So I agree with that. On the other hand, I think my guess, I agree that it would be great to get spat collectors out there to see to get more of a handle on this. But from what I've looked at in those nearshore areas, it's just getting too warm. And it's basically the water temperatures, they are the first ones to destratify in early October, and the water temperature is too warm, and the scallops can't survive that.
Or I'm not saying that it's not too warm or it is too warm. We're just curious if spat is even making it there. And so
My guess is that it is. That's just my guess because we don't have data. I mean, I know people have found scallop larvae in like Vineyard Sound where they're never going to survive. But the larvae can survive warmer temperatures than the adults can. And again, that's my guess because we don't have data. And I agree, if someone could put spat collectors out there, that would be a good thing so that we can get hard data on that.
Or just this on? Just to follow up, from the observations that we've seen recently, like with Nantucket Light Chip South, that huge set of scallops in there. So extremely high density of scallops that were called Peter Pans that didn't grow up. I mean, traditionally, we had those sets of scallops landing in Nantucket Light Chip North, where there was more favorable habitat for scallops, not unlike closed area 1. But we seem to now see these sets of scallops landing in areas that really aren't indicative to having a good scallop set survive. I'm just wondering if anybody could just, give us a little hypothesis of maybe why is that happening and how are they really surviving in some of these other areas. It seems like the depths of scallop habitat is getting deeper and deeper.
Yeah, I've comment on that. Yes, it is, I don't know how long you've been around, but like in the early 1990s, there were sets of scallops in the channel at 55 meters. I mean, pretty shallow, where there's pretty much no scallops there. And we are seeing, like in closed area one and the light ship, we are seeing these scallops are in deeper water than they used to be. So that I think is exactly what's going on. I'm not sure whether George's Bank, whether it's a temperature effect or something else going on. You know, this is something, but that's definitely going on. We're seeing scallops in deeper water than we used to.
That's great. I mean, I think that's something that could be a research idea because it's going to be applicable not only to how we manage the wild fishery, but also our understanding of enhancement as well. And so Jonathan's got a question. I want to give it to him, but I also want to, put a sticky note on a topic that I hope we could maybe touch on, which is some of the things that Key talked about, which really didn't expound upon, which was how do they figure out what density, what are the density dependent effects, some of these ecological processes that are really important to know and how we might inform enhancement. So I'm going to go to Jonathan first for his question, but I think hopefully we can talk, and I'm surprised there's not more conversation about the robot because I know that's on people's minds. So hopefully we can get some conversation around predation and predation control and some of the details around that.
Yeah, so my question's on starfish. I really liked your AUV. In terms of the preparation of the beds and the culling of starfish, I'm wondering if you need to do that multiple times in the life cycle of the scallop before it gets harvested, what goes into that practice? Does it also require catching the scallops too? And so if you could just say a little bit more about kind of from the time that you're doing the site prep all the way through when the scallops are harvested, the amount of times you're interacting with starfish and having to cull or do some predation control.
The fishermen know where there are lots of sisters are from their experience. The fishermen put more efforts on certain area and dredge and remove sisters by hands and putting back living scallops back in the water. Let's keep doing it every day.
Just a comment. I think that's interesting, right? Because you'd assume some level of scallop mortality in terms of moving up and down through the water column. And so we talked about the number of times animals needed to get handled and that like sowing method versus ear hanging or more traditional aquaculture. And so just another wrinkle to the predation control.
So Leslie was sitting at my table back there, and something I never even thought about, and I've been doing this for 25 years, is anytime we've caught a scallop or a sea star, we just shovel it back over. It's never even crossed my mind to have a bin and throw, the starfish in there, allow to die, and maybe every day toss them over once they're dead. But it's something that maybe should be talked on an industry level that I just think was never even thought about or considered. But just something that to follow up on that.
Thanks. I think Leslie Ann had a question in the back.
They do, but it's in small portion. It's kind of excuse, I think, to compose them. Actually, no one wants to do. It's, good word for years. They ban them. So recently, like Chinese buyers buy some certain sea stars as medicine. I don't know. Yeah, sea stars are wet. It's hard to burn out. It's hard to, it takes really it takes time to make compost. Uh, Fishing co-op do, but they keep budget every year for fossil fuel to burn sea stars fuel every year.
Yeah, I had a follow-up on the sea star removal, and you mentioned in your talk that it's important not to remove too many because they do have this important ecosystem function. And I'm curious if there's a certain like tonnage that you guys cap for removing them, or if there's signs that you look for in the ecosystem when you think that you've removed enough. If it's something that we start to get into, how do you manage the cap of sea star removal?
Sea stars, you know, a lot. You cannot count it. But every year, sea stars emerges a lot. So, you know, just removing sea stars from fishing ground doesn't affect ecosystem rebuild. So we don't know proper number of population.
I have a question for our fishermen. Being new to this type of research, with research set aside, do you have any thoughts or suggestions, anything you can tell all of the researchers in the room who do cooperative research with you? Do you have any suggestions or any ways that we can improve our cooperative studies together?
My good friend over here. So I mean, through the process of the research set aside, we prioritize at the council level through the AP input yearly basis of what industry really believes. I think that we've done a pretty good job. Surveys always comes first, but so I hope that helps that answer a little. But just to circle back, I mean, we have great partners. And that's been a relationship that's occurred over years. And yesterday I heard Leslie talk a bit about, fishermen weren't interested. They were just going to kind of take their chances. And that's how we used to think, and that's what we used to do. And we now are in a different place. So I'm optimistic. I'm cautiously optimistic of a few things in our fishery. That cooperation being one with our researchers, and hopefully some natural phenomena that come around. I'm encouraged that maybe the coal pool is going to reestablish itself for a bit. But these are unknowns, and that's how our process works. And I think that it's solid work.
Sure. I mean, we're in a room here today with industry and scientists and other organizations, but we can always be better. And we've talked about how can we make our surveys better. And we've talked about it, and we just haven't done it. But following up 6 months later, perfect example. Most of our scallop surveys happen in the spring. But then this time of year, we're making decisions on something that was surveyed 6 months ago or more. And we've talked about the idea of coming back in the fall and hitting hot spots to make sure the information that we're making decisions on for the following year are still there. And that's something I think that we can definitely move forward and talk about, but that has to make it on a priority list, and time is of the essence. And it's hard to probably budget that, but yeah. Thank you.
Hi, Hugh Copperthwaite, Coastal Enterprises. I was wondering if you could elaborate on the Sea Star mop just a little bit. Like, I think I know how that works, but could you talk about that?
Yeah, star mop is like a mop to clean up the floor. It's kind of when we clean the floor, we use some sheet of chemical sheet to stick small pieces of like dust on the sheet. It's like that. Sea stars, on the surface of sea stars, there's some spines on it. So the spine entangle to the cotton, it fix them up. And then it's like swipe the sea floors and get it out. But it's really hard to remove starfish from the mop. It's a manual work.
So it's actually dragged through across the bottom.
It's like a choring net. Like it's like, yeah. Choring.
Thank you. And I was just going to add that Sea Stars make good dissection kits for, school kids and adults too. Why not?
Tow time is like they tow like 1 kilometer. What I because fisherman knows an area there are lots of sea stars, so intensively they tow some of on it in the area.
So is this, yes, this is on. Mary Beth Tully, O'Hara Corporation, and a past member of the New England Fishery Management Council and longtime member during that time on the SCULP committee. But I just wanted to go back to the research set aside, which the members of the panel have mentioned, and I think it's come up before. We have a lot of our partners here today and some additional researchers as well. So just wanted to make a quick note about it. It is, the program is found within the Fishery Management Plan of the New England Fishery Management Council, and the council spends a tremendous amount of time, as do we in the industry and managers, on that program. So priorities are set on an annual basis. We get input from the plan team, our technical people and scientists. The AP spends a tremendous amount of time going through that very long list, as does the committee and then the full council. And I thought of this earlier and raised my hand, but we kind of moved on when we talked about, ocean acidification. Well, the industry recognized that ocean acidification for a shelf-live species was important, and it rose up as a priority from, I believe, from the AP a good 10 years ago. We found out at that time, however, that the monitors that we envisioned that we could put on these boats didn't really exist. So, times change, technology is fast moving, and so if any researchers in the room are aware of monitors that could feasibly be deployed in the fleet, they might want to reach out and touch base. It's a very dynamic program. It's a 4-page list. There are a lot of priorities out there, but we do spend a lot of time every single year in the spring, learning about those projects that have occurred and what they learned, and contemplating what we need for the future. So I just wanted to make a plug for the research set aside.
Thank you very much, David Bethany, Commercial Fisheries Research Foundation. Thank you all again for sharing your insight. I just want to follow up on Jonathan's and Hugh's questions with the scallop mop. So the fishermen, when they dredge, they put the sea stars aside in the bin. But then how often are they doing these scallop mop tows? Are those once a season, or are they, when they're not scalloping, they do the the sea star mop? What's the different approaches? How does it all come together throughout the season or year?
Okay, so sowing scalp, seabed scalp aquaculture is like agriculture. So fishermen, in the season, fishermen are not very busy. They go out to use star mop to remove sea stars. So it's not the all season work, but sometimes. when they have time, they do that.
So following up on that, is that mandatory or voluntary if you're a part of a part of that fishery?
Okay, that's a mandatory. Each, fishing corps, it puts norma. Do you know what the norma is? The numbers you have to get in the season. Each fisherman have a certain number of, weight. You have to remove from the water for fishing corps. It's a rule in the corps.
A question in the back? Farrell first and then, and
I had a question about the octopus removal. Is that done, is that a separate permit or a separate fishery, or is that also done by the scallopers? And then do you guys have regulations that are specific to the scallop area for the octopus, or is it the same as it would be for outside of the seeding areas?
In the scallop sowing area, the area is all controlled by the same fishing corps. So you can do anything in there. You can catch octopus, you can catch fish in there. If you don't go out from the limited area, out of the boundary controlled by fishing corps, you can do anything.
There you go. I was a little bit curious about the buffer zones you were talking about. Could you just explain a little bit more what, I guess, their purpose is?
Buffer zone is like if you wanna swipe the seabed, the target area is so huge, and sea stars come from deeper water. You don't know where they come from. So to focus dredging like star mobs, it's kind of more efficient to have a buffer zone and just swipe the buffer zone intensively and then keep fishing ground clean from starfish. That's right. Do you understand what I mean?
So the buffer zone, you're more frequently removing starfish from?
Yes, yes.
Okay. And then I did have another question. This is for Glenn. You made a promise to say your crazy conjecture about how we can predict these anomalies, or if we can. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes, although I'm not wearing the squid costume I did for my talk yesterday. The key thing is upstream conditions. And so that you can actually forecast pretty well up to 9 months in advance for the position of the shelf break fund. We just had a paper accepted. Adrian Silva, a postdoc that I work with, is the lead author on that. But if you have enough information upstream, then it really, 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 really helps with the modeling. And a lot of our deficiencies in modeling come due to the lack of observations in several key choke points, for example. And one of the ones that's kind of most shockingly not measured subsurface is the tail of the Grand Bank. And it turns out that that's where a lot of the Labrador seawater recirculates. And it looked like probably what happened is this cold fresh pulse was when a barrier was released there near the tail of the Grand Bank. And my colleague, Paula Fratantoni, has been trying to get a big observational program up there funded for, I think it's about 30 years now. She was talking about that on Monday there. But it's just a really important point that affects a lot of things downstream, and it really affects in particular, the type of zooplankton. There's that seesaw actually that was in Kevin Friedland's presentation there between the Labrador sea slope water and the warm slope water coming down. But I beat this drum all the time now, is we need more subsurface observations, because satellites, they're wonderful. They take really good pictures, but they're up at the surface, and a lot of the action, for fishing is subsurface there. And luckily, I just got appointed to the Integrated Ocean Observing System Advisory panel there. So I'll be pushing for that, very hard. And I will say, for this region, one of the things that's really tough is the Pioneer Array moved from the upstream end to the downstream end just north of Cape Hatteras. And so, I'm really pushing to try and get some real-time moorings in south of New England, and then hopefully further upstream. But that's a really good question.
Yeah, great. And I think maybe if we could put down in the notes an objective to try to leverage some of these products that come from the oceanographic community that can inform some of our activities, right? I mean, so you talked about Squid Squad, which is very real time. Perhaps SPAC collection could be informed by, kind of more real-time circulation models or temperature models or that type of thing. So I think that's something to explore and at least put on our radar, that there are so many oceanographic products that are almost real-time now with information that could be really informative.
And one example of that, I just thought that was fascinating about the possible connection between storms in the fall and the spat there. And my student Lucas actually had a paper published where he for the 7 years, he has timelines of what type of synoptic meteorological event occurred and when the stratification broke down, all that timing. And, I'd love to talk about when the extreme events were in terms of the spat there. Sandy obviously was a really big, large-scale event. It was heavily affected by the marine heat wave, that had happened the previous winter there, with all those anomalously warm conditions there. So I think that's a really interesting area to explore moving forward, is, which individual meteorological events were really important there.
We'll go to the back first, then get you, Jonathan.
Hello. Okay. This is Mike Coogan from University of New Hampshire. I'm wondering if anyone has used any sort of baited traps for predators, whether that be sea stars or probably not octopus, but has anyone heard of anything like that? Mussel droppers or something like that?
We do in Japan, but very small portion, because we need equipment and some dead fish in it, and then it's labor intensive to remove sea stars, like bring the cage on the seabed onto a vessel. The star mop is much faster, more like efficient. So in some small areas, in like a bay, some people use the cage star to remove sea stars. It's not very efficient.
So my question's going to be for Glenn in the industry. So Glenn, you showed a plot that had a warm core, or the bend in the Gulf Stream and a shingle out over on the shelf. And one of my takeaways from scallop management last year is that we can be one shingle or one turn in the Gulf Stream away from a pretty significant mortality event in the mid-Atlantic. And so my own hypothesis has been that George's Bank is probably more favorable conditions, but you showed a lot of warm core eddies spinning off. And I know Coonamessett Farm Foundation's HabCam had tracked warm water up on the bank a few years ago. So I think we're seeing that in some of our snapshots and surveys. I'm just wondering your own thoughts about environmental conditions on George's, the susceptibility of that bottom to some of these warming conditions, whether they're eddies that peel off or movements in the Gulf Stream and what you've seen on the water. Thanks.
That's a great question, kind of contrasting there. It turns out that in the Mid-Atlantic, near Wilmington Canyon, for example, there, a lot of the eddies end up going over there, and it's what Vijay and I call the eddy graveyard, actually. The eddies seem to just suddenly disappear from the Clark charts there. So presumably, they may be spinning down around there, but one of the Vijay's students, actually Adrian Silver, there showed that there is what she calls a ring corridor, which is a preferred path that the warm core rings follow. So you do get a lot of Gulf Stream influences there, around Wilmington Canyon there. George's Bank is really interesting because there's a couple important ways that it's different. One of them is there's a lot more tidal mixing energy there. So if you're going to get something coming in along the bottom, it's going to tend to want to mix up, a lot more rapidly. So you may have the forcing conditions that might drive a bottom intrusion, but maybe it'll just mix away, within a mile or two of the foot of the shelf break front. The foot of the front actually intersects the bottom a fair amount more deeply off of George's Bank, like 125 meters, 60 fathoms, compared to 80 meters or 40 fathoms there. And so I think that also affects what can get on. There's also stronger stratification down in the south. And one of the themes that I usually try and talk about the changes is as the waters get warmer, and then especially if we get fresh water near the surface there too, you get a lot more stratification. And so when you get big, and that's density differences there, say between the surface and a fixed depth, the more stratified you are, the easier it is to move waters from offshore onto the continental shelf, but then also to get waters from the continental shelf offshore. And I've been stunned. I was in graduate school in the 1980s, and I thought, the coastal ocean worked one way, but it's really, really, really changed over the last 20 years there. And I think those differences in stratification are important too. There's far fewer of these mid-depth salinity maximum intrusions, for example. On George's Bank, the frequency increases the closer you get to Cape Hatteras there. And just another comment is that there's a wonderful paper that came out in Marine Ecology Progress Series in early July. Sarah Weisberg from Stony Brook was the lead author there. She was looking at the timing of larval fish onto the continental shelf as just sort of a general ecological result there. The number one correlative factor there was the presence or absence of these mid-depth salinity maximum intrusions. So they're bringing in larval fish. It's just a really important process that just hasn't been studied that much there. But, it's really fascinating to think about the differences between the two regions and then think about how the oceanography is different in the different years. Adrian also has what she called heat maps of ring occupancy. So you can look month by month to see, for different areas and for successful recruitment there, it'd be really interesting to line it up with some of her maps there. There's a lot of things that could be done. All it takes is money. mid-depth salinity maximum intrusions, and I apologize, this is heavily into process jargon here. But essentially, when the thermocline sets up there, you have an upper layer and a lower layer, and there's a process by which that warm, salty water can go in the middle of the water column. And we've seen it get as far north as Block Island, actually. There, it can really go large distances onshore. And this is my shocking physical oceanography revelation here is we don't know the dynamics of those intrusions. They're associated with warm core rings being in the proximity there, but and we know they're occurring much more frequently there, but we need to use some computer simulations and some idealized models to find out what the physics are there. But I think that those intrusions, my colleague Ke Chen has shown what it takes to get a bottom intrusion, which is actually winds from the west. He has a really nice paper, and he has essentially the predictive conditions you need for these actually forming there. But we don't have that for the mid-depth ones yet.
Just going back to the starfish for a second. We had a decent big set of them up in Stonington in an area. And the fishermen working together, we all looked the lobstermen out trapping them. Working together, we used the hot water barrels. It's what we used to clean off our buoys. And after they stopped ripping them apart and throwing them overboard, we really reduced the population of them just with the traps. No, it's probably 15 years ago.
I was just going to say, let's go to Eric Eric next.
That's it. Thank you. On starfish, and I'm very intrigued about pickled starfish when you inject them with vinegar. But now that we have ocean acidification, have you used any other liquids to inject? Say ammonia on the other end of the spectrum, if it's the pH that's killing the starfish. And second part of my question is, what do you do with the starfish? So you kill them, or do you bring them ashore to dry out? What do you do with the starfish that are mocked?
The second question, that removed a starfish on the ground, it's usually burned. Burn them with garbage.
And the first part of my question was your AUV that goes and injects vinegar. Have you used anything else?
Okay, so
vinegar is very acidic.
I
You
know.
have ocean acidification.
I came up the same idea actually. I don't want to make ocean sour. It's vinegar is the cheapest liquid you can get. And other idea is my colleague found a liquid from a cow in cow's body. I don't know which organ was that. They make acid in their body, and that's sour enough, but very natural. And that while the factory makes beef, that liquid is all discarded. Just throw them away. So you can utilize the liquid maybe. Actually, my colleagues tried, and it worked.
You haven't used anything on the other end of the pH spectrum?
No, only vinegar and the cow liquid. The vinegar is cheapest you can get.
I was just gonna say a comment from some of the work that we've done. What we noticed is that starfish are kind of actually somewhat weak in the summer, and they just die right on deck. And being pulled through the thermocline from depth seems to kill them pretty good. Because when we were doing the transplanting work in closed area 1, we were putting them in totes, and within a matter of like 5 minutes, they just become a gross, gooey pile. So I don't know if like there needs to be an additional boiling. I mean, it might be a seasonal thing. They might be more survival, you know, they might survive the mopping process in the winter, but in the summer, you might just have to leave the thing on deck and it'll be fine.
Just more discussion on how to kill starfish. In the mussel industry and other shellfish aquaculture production systems, hydrated lime is used, particularly on mussel droppers as a spray for a short contact time to the exterior of the animal. And that does a job, and I can only imagine that if it was actually injected, it would be lethal as well. So there's another very inexpensive alkaline compound.
I think we got one more question in the back, and as a guiding principle last night, I said I'm very averse to standing between people in the bar, but I'm also very averse to standing between people and their lunch. So we will have one more question from Andrew, and wrap up the session.
Yeah. So for Kai and Dr. Osaka, your entire system is hugely impressive. And I'm just curious moving forward if you expect climate change, things like ocean acidification and warming to impact the system that you have in place, and if you're taking any steps for any number of the different processes that you've shared with us to try and adapt them to a changing climate.
Well, immutable, with the temperature become more high. Now, this that spot mortality, high mortality, this there, where cannot get enough spot, and Hokkaido the same. I think this influence is a global warming. I cannot ensure product of scalp in Japan now. Okay?
Great. Well, thank you. That was a really lively discussion. We covered a lot of ground. And if you would mind giving our speakers and panelists another round of applause. Thank you.